My name is Kilkenny, the host of the Modern Mystic podcast. And today I am thrilled because we have award winning author Maia Toll with us again, people. So, Maia Toll is amazing, and she's an award winning author of her most recent book called Letting Magic In. She's also written the Night School and the Wild Wisdom series. After pursuing an undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan and a master's at New York University, Maia apprenticed with a traditional healer in Ireland, where she spent extensive time growing cycles of plants, the alchemy of medicine making, and the psycho-spiritual aspects of healing, learning all the above. She is the co-owner of the retail store Herbieri with locations in Asheville, North Carolina and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You can find more info on her website, myatoll.com. Maia, welcome to the Modern Mystic podcast, and welcome back, because you are only, I think, the second guest I've ever invited back, because your episode called Healing and Connection Through Plant Medicine, Herbalism, and Earth-Based Practices, number 30, was so well received. Our audience just ate it up, and it's still one of the top ones. So I'm so thrilled to have you back.
I am so thrilled to be back. I've been really excited about this interview. I'm kind of doing the interview rounds, and um, not everyone gives good interview, but Kilkenny talking to you is always dreamy. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, high honored. I love your wit, your wisdom, your wily mind, and now you have written a memoir. So I want to get into that, but I'm curious because now you're back and you've midwifed a memoir, and of course, all of us, hopefully, if we're on the conscious living path, right? It's like that spiral where we might be at the same point. I'm going to ask you one question that I always ask all my guests, but now there'll be a different vantage point. So, what does it mean to you in this moment to be a modern mystic?
Mm, it's so interesting. I should have gone back and listened to what I said last time. You know, for me, it's always about connection. It's always about being able to sense beyond your own skin. And I think that we do that in a variety of ways at various points in our lives. But at the foundation, connection is the key word for me. In Letting Magic In, I use the metaphor of a spider web, and that sense of being able to sit in the center of the web and feel out in different directions. And I think that that's what mysticism is. It's that ability to feel in and to feel out in a myriad of different directions.
Mm. Well, I love that metaphor that you used in your book. And it's so gorgeous, apropos of what you're saying about that ability of the modern mystic to feel in and yet feel without, which is a theme of your book, one of them for sure. And the web, of course, seems invisible, right? I love that because, like, that feeling when you wake up in the morning and if you go outside, a lot of our friends, are into plant medicine and herbalism, and you're a preeminent herbalist too, right? And you walk in your garden or wherever you're walking in the woods, and all of a sudden you hit the spider web and you didn't even see it, right? But then you feel it. And I feel like it's this perfect metaphor because that's what so often I think happens to people with their spirituality, with their psycho-spiritual practices, or with their, spiritual awakenings, that all of a sudden they're in life and they hit this thing and it seems gooey and you want to get it off you, right? Or if it feels confusing, but it's that magical moment where the things that seem invisible and maybe not real, you realize they're actually real. And
Yes.
so that cobweb, right, is so perfect. And your book is so much about that and your journey.
Kilkenny, I just have to call this out because it's so spot on. That like sticky feeling and you want to get it off you. It's like you're on a spiritual path. You are trying to step into a different state of consciousness. And yet, when it happens, a lot of times we want to get it off us. It's not what we expected. It's not what we thought we wanted. It's not in the form that we were looking for. And we want to get it off us. Um, it's really part of the reason that I wanted to write a narrative instead of a book that's more like my previous books, because I think that that push me, pull you we go through with our spiritual practices, that like, I want it, I don't want it, I want it, I don't want it. Ooh, this is uncomfortable. You know, it's very hard in a book that's just kind of giving you the rah rah, cheer you forward through this process, to acknowledge the ambivalence we all feel when things get sticky and icky and tough. Um, when you get a cobweb in the face.
It's so true, and it's even apropos. We were talking a little bit personally before we hit the record button, and I know even with my work, it's turned into a lot of mentoring and coaching. I have a program called Vibrant Venus Elite Coaching, and I've had two clients this week as we've unpacked, practices to help them connect more deeply to the mystery and the magic in practical ways, bring it back into their life. They both of them were sharing the resistance and how it's fun at first, but now they feel like, oh my God, I've opened up these things and it felt like the honeymoon period, but now it's hard again. Am I backtracking? And I'm like, no, this is the moment, right? Like any relationship that we've had that's sustainable and long term that we're devoted to, right? We know there's going to be resistance, challenges, stickiness, muckiness that comes up. And any relationship that we have in our life that's worth having, if you look back at it, there's some harder points, and that's the time to keep going, right?
Yeah, and the truth is, the only way through is left foot, right foot through. And so when you hit those mucky moments, you're already in the middle. So if you
Yes.
backtrack, you still have to go through. You just have to go through the wrong direction. So if you're going to go through, you might as well keep, you know, moving up the sacred spiral instead of sliding back down the staircase.
That's so good. That's so good. And it's a sign, like you said, of being halfway through or whatever percentage through. And so it's not a sign, friends who are listening, who are like, oh, I had the spiritual awakening, or I had all this magic happening, but then all this cloaking is happening and it feels hard. That's not a sign that you're doing anything wrong or that the practices aren't working. It's actually probably a sign that they're working just fine. And like Maya said, to keep going, to keep going. It's awesome. Well, in your book, so let's talk there, because I was so fascinated to hear about your journey and, your journey, of course, from becoming an herbalist and then becoming an author, which was my initial intention to speak to. And then when I read your delicious book, I was like, oh, this is so cool. Actually, the journey begins when you're a child going to camp, and then how you went from experiencing a lot of, I think, common things that people experience throughout their young adulthood, etc., and how that really led you to the merging and recognition and marrying of the mundane world, so to speak, and the modern world, so to speak, and then the mythical worlds, which you straddle so beautifully in all of your work. But could you talk about that, please? How you decided to write about that, and how writing is this catalyst for expressing this combination of the mythical and the mundane.
It's really interesting because Letting Magic In, the memoir, is the book I've been trying to write since 2016. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, so the initial version of the memoir had small write-ups about the plants at the top of every chapter. For those of you who are familiar with the herbiary, those small write-ups became the herbiary. So I started working on the memoir, and I realized that I didn't have the chops yet, that it was like going to take me a really long time to kind of get to the place where I could tell this story in the way that I wanted to. And so I was watching people really respond to those little plant write-ups, and I was like, oh, but these plant write-ups are kind of good. Like, they're good already. They're good little bite-sized chiclets that I can can offer right now, and then continue on this journey of trying to figure out how to tell this larger story. Um, it was really important to me to a couple things were really important to me. It was important to me to tell this as a narrative, and like my agent, even my editor, were trying to steer me towards like a less narrative format of nonfiction. You know, we have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
nonfiction now that's short bites, or it's exercises that are kind of telling you how to do something. And I needed the narrative so that like you could see me walking into the spider web. So you could see me getting goo in my face and reacting. Um, so that when you have that reaction, you have a context and you're like, oh, it's okay. There's another side. Like we keep going and something different happens. So that was the first thing. But the other thing is that so many spiritual memoirs are like almost unreadable. People are so in the mystic and not in the modern, right? Not in
Yeah.
mundania, that the stories are ungrounded and really hard to relate to. And I wrote some of that stuff 5 years ago and 6 years ago, like in trying to get to this and trying to figure out how to tell the story in a way that was like grounded in a body, having an earthly experience.
Yeah.
And going to Starbucks and, filling the gas tank at the gas station and like doing all the everyday things we do, having roommates and lovers and friends traipsing in and out. All of that is a part of our journey, and it doesn't always seem apparent. We sequester the moments that feel super magical or feel super mystical from the rest of our lives, and they're not sequestered. They're woven in, they're braided through. So I wanted to show full cloth what this experience and journey felt like.
Yeah. Yeah, and you did that so well, and that's so much of the intention I hold with this podcast. Just what you're saying, right? The mystical and the mundane, the magic in the present moment. And like you said, you know, so often we have these amazing moments or workshops or epochs of time where everything is in the flow and all of that, and they're incredible and they can be great catalysts for growth. However, and what I loved about your book and what I try to offer here in this forum on the podcast are how we don't have to wait for those moments, and how the mystical is in the mundane. The magic is in the present moment, but often we have to figure out practices and ways to align with it when it's not pouring and flowing towards us. How can we start to move and align with those moments? One of the things that I really appreciated about your book is your exploration of the body, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that more, and how even like going to your acupuncturist, you started having, more transcendental experiences. But so much of it, as you wrote about so eloquently, was how the body, and you have all this Virgo, right, in your chart, you
I have a
mentioned,
lot of
which is,
earth.
a lot of earth. I'd love
Yeah.
to see your chart. But and that's the beauty of earth and the beauty of embodiment, right? Is that our body, at least in my experience, I'm a tantrika yogi, and a lot of our audience are Buddhists and tantrikas, and how the body is not a bummer and something to try to escape, but how the body can be this GPS to lead us to the mystical. So, would you mind speaking about that, please, a little bit for our listeners who haven't, most of whom won't have read your book because it just came out, and just your own experience in life of how the body is this real amazing GPS to lead us towards the mythical and mystical.
Yeah, I think that we somehow have the notion that intuition exists in our brain, that like, our connection to the magic of the world is through our mind. And so, and some of this is how those of us in this world speak. We say, I saw something, or I heard something. And so we're using language that allows one to suspect that information that's incoming is coming in through the usual channels, right? And our usual channels are seeing, hearing, smelling, taste. And then it goes up into our brain and our brain translates it. What I've really come to appreciate is that my true inner knowing doesn't come from any of those senses, nor does it come from my mind. Usually if I am actually hearing words, that's just my brain talking to itself. Like, if I hear the words, "Hey, Maya, hop off the exit here. Maybe you don't want to stay on the highway anymore." That's most likely my brain trying to have an intuitive moment, right? That's my brain being like, okay, I am so cool. I know that something might have happened up ahead on the highway. So here we go. I'm hopping off. If, on the other hand, I suddenly have like a little bit of nausea, or my eyes keep tracking to the exit sign, even though it's not my exit, that's what I pay attention to, right? That's a different kind of
Mm,
knowing. It's a knowing that's being fed through the physicality of me. And the way I think about this is we're constantly taking in information from the world around us. There are some senses that we have, like we've named that information. We've named sight, we've named hearing, but there are many more avenues through which we are grabbing information. And you have nerve endings all over your skin, and they're just feeling the air all the time. What's going on? We don't think of our skin as being able to like read barometric pressure and things like that, but it can.
yeah.
So you're taking in information all the time. We don't have the words and the mental capacity to translate it into um, the avenues we're used to, right? Like it comes into us, and we don't have those pre-carved pathways like we do for hearing or for sight. Something comes in through your eyes, and your brain pretty instantly knows what it is. That's a pathway we've been using since we were quite young. Hearing, same thing. But when we're just kind of feeling something in our energy body or on our like skin as a sensing organ as opposed to feeling pain or touch, we don't really have that instant pathway. So it comes in and it swirls around within us, and like we know it's there and it's affecting us, but we don't have language. So when I'm getting information that's pre-verbal or non-verbal, that's the information that I kind of go, "Oh, hold on a sec. I need to pay closer attention to that." That's not my monkey mind just having a like chattery stuff with itself about how intuitive it is and how it's going to give me this magical moment by getting me off the highway before I get stuck in traffic or whatever. Um, I know for me, when I pay attention, my mind is always trying to have little intuitive moments. Like it's magic seeking, right? And so it's
Yeah.
kind of always telling me like, "Ooh, ooh, pay attention to this. Ooh, the phone rings. Oh, that's so and so." And it's like my brain is making it up to try to give me the moment as opposed to opening up and allowing information from other sources to come in. And so
Mm,
I try to differentiate between those two things because my brain will lead me astray over and over again if I let it.
hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I love how you spoke about, noticing, okay, do your eyes keep tracking to the exit sign? Or can you give another concrete example or two of ways that you're superseding the mind, quote unquote? My verbiage would be the ego, like when the ego wants to take over, because a lot of us, like you're saying, like people who are seeking spirituality and magic all the time, I'm one of them, like voracious. Okay, what are the signs? What are this? What are that? Right?
Right.
And that nuance you're speaking of that distinction between the receiving of information as opposed to hijacking yourself as the main control panel, offering that
Yeah.
information out, aka the ego. So what are other strategies that you would offer?
So
that
for
you feel in your
me,
body?
yeah, for me, a lot of incoming information becomes physical. So I'm always looking for, like, if I get nauseous, that's a good one for
Yeah.
me. If I get a flash headache, um, that's something I pay attention to. If my hands start shaking,
Yeah.
these physical signs that something's going on. And then oftentimes I have to figure out what's going on, right? And that's
Yeah.
that moment where you kind of engage the mind with what you're feeling. Um,
Right.
and that's a
Now,
tricky
with
moment.
those be Mhm. Excuse me.
No, I was just going to say that's a tricky moment too, because it's really easy to start trying to, like, put an overlay on it, right? Oh, I'm
Yeah.
nauseous because, instead of kind of
Mhm.
inquiring into, what am I feeling? When did it start? Like, you know, being a detective instead of being a dictator. Um,
That's so good. Being a detective instead of being a dictator,
you know,
right?
like,
Translating it as opposed to, yeah,
right,
determining it.
like, gently investigating and trying to allow the sensations to open up wider.
Yeah. Yes. I talk about that and I love that you use that word. Instead of getting like, I feel like often one thinks of in our society is like a vertical self, like the wider self, like the wider. I'm always talking about that concept. I love that you use that word too. It's like expanding out circumferentially, not just like vertically up and down kind of. I
Right.
love that. And do you find that, when you have these sensations that the body offers you, I get ringing in my ears. For you, you're describing nausea or like, the hand sweating or things like that. Is that for all experiences to pay attention to, or those more experience that one might label more negative or contractive? Do you get the same sensations in your body for uplifting and expanded experiences as well, or things to move towards, or do you get different, more quote unquote pleasant sensations in your body?
Oh, that's a great question. I definitely get more pleasant sensations. I tend to have more of, like, the heart opening sensation,
Yeah.
when there's something I should be moving toward, that kind of sense of expansion around the heart or the solar plexus, that sense of opening. Um, it's interesting. I actually had this experience just the other day. A friend of mine is a jeweler, and she released a new jewelry line, and she's absolutely amazing. If anyone wants to just see gorgeous work, her name's Savannah King, and she um, trained in New York City at a school that does all old world goldsmithing techniques. So, like, what would have come out of
Wow.
Egypt and Rome and ancient Greece. Um, and she does all handwork, and it is stunning. So when she releases a new collection, I always look. I rarely even consider buying, because gold. Um, and I was just scrolling through, and I saw a pendant, and I mean, it clenched my heart. I can't even say
Yeah.
it grabbed my heart. It clenched my heart. And I had almost a sense of hyperventilating a little
Yeah.
bit. And I was so, like, stunned and shocked. I mean, I'm scrolling, y'all. I'm just scrolling. And all of a sudden I'm in this moment. Um, so I walked away from my computer, and I came back a few hours later, and I had the same experience, and I sat with it, and I started sobbing. And,
Mm,
and I felt such a tremendous, like, opening through, my heart, and my middle chakras, like, everything just felt like it was blowing open. Um, and I I knew that this was a talisman that was meant for me, that it was medicine for me.
yeah.
Um, and that's obviously a very different sensation than the nausea and things, but it was just as intense. I mean, this was not a little, like, oh, I think I might feel good. It was
Yeah.
this was a internal tsunami. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I love that. Well, the body is a divination tool, right? So, a lot of people love, and you do, you're a creator of, we talked about it last time, fantastic tarot cards. I love your oracle cards, um, specifically, really, their oracle cards. And the pendulums and all those tools that can be amazing, but there's no greater and more cheap tool and freer than your own physical body, right? And are so, as you're speaking to so beautifully and profoundly, the body, if we start paying more and more attention to the body, and that's how I think of it, being a modern mystic, and even why I'm, for 18 years teach yoga, because it's like the body is this way in to all the invisible realms. And so again, we don't have to bypass the body. The more we pay attention to the body and its sensations, it can really act as this legend on the map of our journey of life. So I love that. Thank you for giving such concrete examples. And yeah, people listening, start to, for 24 hours, make a pact with yourself. Like, okay, I'm going to really, in the next 24 hours, pay attention to as many sensations in my body as possible, as if I'm new to my body, and see where that leads you in the way of your choices. It's a really profound practice. I
Yeah.
love how you spoke about the chakras in your book, even. And I know you talked about them as being like this midpoint between the physical, and the non-physical. Those listeners, I have a whole series on each chakra and then the whole chakra system itself. So friends who haven't heard that series can listen. Many people will be familiar with the chakras. And that's such an incredible map. What are some other maps, if you have any? Because chakras are, again, really detailed in their architecture and can help us kind of conceptualize very abstract things into concrete things in our bodies and in our psyches. Do you have any other maps that you like to use other than the chakra system to think about connecting the unseen and seen worlds in a way that feels really practical and easeful?
I mean, truthfully, at this stage of my life, I don't even use the chakra system as a system very much. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's a roadmap that I've explored, but it's not the one that has um, like landed in my dailiness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Oftentimes, and this is less of a map and probably more of a practice, but I I like to try to tune into the edges of my own energy field.
Mm.
So that sense of like pushing them out, pulling them in, because that's the thin membrane between me and everything beyond me. So I like to experiment and explore with that and just kind of see like, where is my energy right now? What is it connected to? What is it not connected to? Is it expanding? Is it contracting? And just noticing, I picture it like a plasma bubble around myself, like I'm
That's a
bubble
great.
girl walking through life. Um, you know,
Yes.
right?
That's.
And sometimes that bubble gets pulled in close, and sometimes it gets pushed out further. I try to drop in and connect with the earth, connect up with the heavens, the stars, the solar energy. And so, like, all these different ways that I can extend and expand my little plasma circle um,
Mm-hmm.
is something that I work with quite a bit. And for me, that's an easy thing. Like I can be futzing with that at a stoplight. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like when we talk about really keeping this daily, we're not like I am not sitting in a corner chanting and ringing a gong and doing this. I'm walking my
Yeah.
dogs and kind of being like, huh, I'm feeling like my energy feels depleted. Like where is it? How is it? Can I kind of reinfuse it from the world around me? Can I reinfuse it from letting in some sunlight and just in different moments? What's the tonic? What's the medicine for how my energy is feeling? And just exploring like what those things might be.
That's so great. And I'm so passionate too about just all those mundane moments and as many of them as possible when we have the time to play with how we're feeling energetically, psychologically, because of course there's the overlay of the psychological with the energetics, and that's a great, really practical example. So thank you so much, right? Paying attention to where you feel like your energy is expanding out from your body, and then the parameter of that, where it's ending, and then, growing it, contracting it, and noticing, like you said, oh, when I add sunlight, what does that feel like? Oh, if I go at night, full moon in a few days, what if I went out for 2 minutes? What does that feel like? When I pet my dog, what does my energy feel like? When I talk to, fill in the blank, oh, what does my energy feel like? Right. And then starting to play with that idea of replenishing your energy versus depleting the energy, or the input versus the output in this psycho spiritual way. So, such a brilliant example. Thank you for that. Now,
Yeah,
on
and
to words.
you know what? Let me just throw
Yes.
in one more thing, Kilkenny, because if people are interested in that, like the next step with that process for me is just keep an eye out for leaks.
Mm,
Like the little hole in the tire. Um,
so good.
and if you feel like you're a balloon and something's hissing out, notice that like where it corresponds on your body, what metaphorically does that mean for you, or actually, you know what I mean? Like if you
Yeah,
twisted your knee and you feel like there's an energy leak in that area, that's probably just pure physical, not even metaphysical. Um, so yeah.
that's really, really good. Really, really good. Thank you for that add on for sure. Huge. So let's talk about more words and language, because you're such a word smith and a language Jedi. And I'm just like obsessed with words. And I know even on your social, which, I'm not on like a ton, but you like often have these like words that I've never heard of, which you're like, I think the only person I can think of who uses words that I haven't heard of, where like this word you'll have on your posts and stuff. So can we talk please about the power of language? And I'm curious your thoughts, sentiments on, and any really elucidation on the power of language from a psycho-spiritual perspective, i.e., what are your views on blessings, hexing, cursing even, like, and the energy that language holds, and how you work with it and think about it.
Mm, I love this. I'm going to answer this while we go for a walk because my dog is using her language and she's like, I got stuck outside. Come get me. So I I adore language. I adore language on a lot of different levels. Like some of what you're talking about is just pure love of words and the the way they feel in your mouth and the way they sound when you say them. Um, but beyond that, language is one of our most amazing metaphysical tools, and it's one of the oldest metaphysical tools. If you go back to the oldest religious and spiritual text, first there was the word. Um, we need to name things in order to understand them. That's like fundamental to how we create our reality. I think we've seen this a lot lately with the desire to change the meaning of words and to add new words to the everyday, the everyday use. Like we're seeing this a lot with people exploring words for gender, right? Because if you don't have a word for it, then it's hard to know that that thing exists. So we have to name things. And if you go back to like the fantasy novels from the 60s and 70s, a very common trope is that the wizard knows the names of things. And
Mm-hmm.
that if you can name something truly, then you have power over it. You can control it. If you can name someone,
Yeah.
so um, if you go back to like these early fantasy books and stuff, over and over again, the king, the wizard, the powerful people do not reveal their true name, because by revealing your true name, you're giving up a modicum of control. Somebody else can call you, right? Like we summon demons by knowing their true name. So language language is a tool, but it is also the thing that pulls something from the realm of ideas, from the metaphysical into the physical.
Mm,
Until it has a name, until there is language around it, um, it's still kind of in that half form, in that dreamy, not quite here. But as soon as we name it, it becomes concrete. So language is an incredible tool, and for people who are exploring um, what's now thought of as the more witchy side of things, and wondering like what the heck a spell is. All a spell is putting words to an intention to make it concrete. That's what a spell is, right?
yeah.
It's pulling something from the ethers, giving it language so that it has power, so that it has vibration, because words have vibration, and so that it has substance.
Yeah, so good. And that's the same thing, with when you hear vexing and all the things, you're speaking to the truth that language does have power. In the yoga and Buddhist traditions, I don't know if you've heard of this term, but it's called the matrika shakti, right? And it's this acknowledgement that words, as you said, are vibration, and vibration contains power and energy. And when we, as you said, craft and hone it with our intention and specificity of languaging and syllables, then things become and are made manifest. And I love how you talked about the tropes and in so many legends, even opera. There's like an opera about like, the name, and exactly, if you know someone's name, it's powerful. And there's so many things I want to say about your answer. It's so fun talking to you. But one of the things I don't want to forget is what's so interesting about your book, which I didn't know, is that how you changed your name. So
Yes.
how interesting is that? And maybe let's dive into that a little bit. Your, claiming and yeah, declaration. I think how you put it was um, starting fresh and kind of severing for you childhood expectations. So, but I'd love to hear it in your own words and your feeling about that.
Yeah. It's interesting because in many older cultures, there was a time where you left your childhood name behind and you took a new name. And,
Mm,
um, my family is Jewish, and in the bar and bat mitzvah ceremony, now you're just like given your quote Hebrew name. So basically, what they do is they take your American name and they find the closest Hebrew name to it, and they say you are now, Miriam. And I'm like, great, thanks. Um, but but I think that this tradition came from taking on an adult name. What are you going to be called as an adult in the community? And it's an opportunity that we no longer really have. The closest thing we have is when women get married, taking their husband's name, which is not quite the same thing now, is it?
no.
Um, so this idea of being able to choose who you are going to be moving forward, um, instead of being the person your parents designated you to be at birth, right? With that naming, um, is a really powerful moment. And especially because words have vibration, especially because words are identifiers. Like, I never felt resonant with my name. And so when I introduced
Mm-hmm.
myself to people, I felt out of resonance. Like in that moment of
Mm,
reaching to shake someone's hand, I didn't feel like I was giving them like a true resonance. I felt like I was almost saying something false right at the beginning of every relationship. Um, and people
mm.
couldn't remember my name, which was fascinating. I would always
Really?
joke,
Because it was a
oh yeah,
common name,
it was a
right? I
very
mean,
common name, but
yeah.
I would always joke that I had
Huh.
name shear. I'd say, "Hi, I'm Michelle," and they'd say, "Oh, so nice to meet you, Molly." And I'd say, "No, I said Michelle," and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Melissa." And you'd be like, "Okay, whatever, I give up." Um, But what, what was
Interesting.
interesting, it was interesting for me because I'm old enough that my parents did not know what um, sex I was going to be when I was born, and they
Hmm.
were expecting a boy. I don't know why, but they were expecting a boy. So the name they had chosen was Michael. And then I
Okay.
had to pop out. I popped out, and they had to quickly, reverse course and figure something else out. Um, so uh, like I think there was a slipperiness from word go. My parents chose the name Michelle, and then um my mom changed the spelling. Like I have a couple of different birth certificates because she would change the spelling and reorder the birth certificate. Um, so
Wow.
there was a slipperiness about the whole gig right out of the gate, like it wasn't going to
Yeah.
stick. It was pretty obvious if you were reading the signs. Um,
Right.
yeah.
That's really interesting. And it's so interesting because I'm a psychic medium. And when I was taught decades ago, right, to connect to people and people who've passed, which I act as a channel to do and comes to me, it was always calling on that person's name. That's the technique to do it. If and when they show up is another story, but they often do. But it's so interesting because there have been times where people have changed their name and I didn't know that, or the person didn't know that. And so when I'm calling them in by a name, somebody else has shown up and I'm kind of like, thank you so much for coming. And this happens, in readings. Okay, thank you. But like, I'm focusing on this other person. And then all of a sudden it's found out later or during the reading, they're like, oh, but wait, they actually were named, they claimed a different name for themselves. And if someone claims a different name as you did, then their birth name often doesn't call them because they've done that radical act of taking the sword and no, this is who I am energetically. So it's a really interesting thing you're talking about, when you do that journey, which you did of changing the name, how you really aligned your vibration with your soul and who you are at your core essence. And so that's really intrinsically connected to you, and that's what I've experienced, not so much the name given at birth for people who claim their names and change them. So
Yeah.
that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
And it's funny. My husband always jokes because there is no one who works for us practically whose name that they're called matches the name that's like on their paperwork for paying them and things.
Hmm.
And I have to say that there's something to be said for going through all the legal hoops, which are a royal pain in the rear end. But
Yeah.
um, until I did that, I kept fussing with my name. Like it was like clothing that didn't quite fit. And so, I would be like changing my nicknames, and like every time I started a new job, I'd try on a new nickname, or, and going through the process of um, legally changing my name, it created a solidity for myself. Like not for everyone else. I mean, it did for everyone else, obviously, but um, within myself, it landed. It became a thing of earth. It was written on legal documents. It was no longer a thing
Hmm.
of air in my head, or a
Hmm.
thing of fire, a passion, or a thing of water, an emotion just of the moment. It was a thing of earth. It was solid, and um, it, it was stone, and it
I
gave me
love that.
something to rest on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with all your earth and your chart, that's important for you. I love how that you felt that resonance, needing that earthy, consecrated in writing in a file cabinet somewhere, your name that felt really
Yeah.
life enhancing and empowering to you. And it was at a pivotal moment in your journey too, right? Where after that, then you went to Ireland and really claimed your herbalism, correct? Like at that
Correct.
moment, it seemed like in the book. So it's really that it seemed like a real representation of really um, moving towards and embracing your chosen destiny. So that was really a
Yes.
cool thing. Now, people listening, it might be that, oh, you know, I don't know if I want to change that name, but their soul or their self, their inner self might feel a little sparky and excited. And so if you're feeling that, there are other ways you can do it without legally doing it. You can take on a warrioress or a warrior name, or like I have a name that I have with I don't really want to say it publicly, but someone very close to me when I'm in the water and like we have a certain name, like when because I'm a surfer and I love the ocean and I'm like a water priestess goddess, and so I have a certain name. So you can also play with that, listeners, and just like try on, a name when you're in a certain place in nature or doing a certain activity, if you feel called to do that, and that can really help. Again, the power of language kind of claim and pull forth in a consecrated way a part of yourself more fully and activate a part of yourself, I think, as well.
Just hearing you say
Very
that,
cool.
Kilkenny, I think that when you have like different names for different parts of your life and therefore parts of yourself, there's a melange happening. Like your primary name is like the umbrella, and you have these
Mm,
other parts of yourself, because we all have multiple parts of ourselves. When you go through a legal process of changing your name, um, you're you're changing the tent,
yeah.
right? It's I would say that if you're a person who feels like you have multiple parts of yourselves and they all kind of need to be called a little differently to kind of call yourself together, call the collective of you, you probably don't want to change your name. But if you're having trouble connecting with that like the larger tent to call all those other pieces into, then that's when you might want to like take the more drastic action, because you really do sever yourself from an old vibration. And if you're not wanting that severing, you know what I mean? Like if your main vibration just needs like to be able to sometimes put on some party clothes, or
Mm-hmm.
or put a cloak on to go off into the woods, then that's a different thing, I think, than that sense of like I need to sever from um an energetic that's just not working for me, and step
Yeah,
into a different energetic entirely with my whole being.
totally. Totally. Thank you for making that distinction, for sure. It's so important. Now I'm curious with being a writer, if you would speak to, for those friends listening who want to become writers, because I think a lot of people do or have written little things. I know I have a project that I've been working on for a while. Some tips of how to move forward if they feel stuck or if they haven't started. And then also, I guess this is really a second question, but for those friends who don't really want to actually become a writer, but maybe use writing as a spiritual practice, some ideas for that.
Yeah.
So
So
two avenues.
let me just clarify your question. So when you say for folks who are wanting to become a writer, are you talking about being published, or are you talking about, you know, just the act of writing?
I think the people who want to be published or take it more seriously, because there are a lot of people I know who are like a lot, like people actually, now that I'm a podcaster, all the time say to me, "Oh my God, I want to start a podcast." Like so many people have this interior fantasy. And I think it's similar to being a writer. Like I've had a lot of people, and I don't know if that happens to you because you're a writer, say to you, like they say to me as a podcaster, "Oh, I've always wanted to write something." But I feel like people, particularly in our stratospheres, have and hold those two dreams a lot. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So what I would say to start is I used to be a teacher. I taught elementary school. And teaching is a separate skill from what you are teaching, right? So being a good
Yes.
teacher is one thing. And then you can be a good teacher and be, horrible at math, but still find a way to like teach at the level that you're teaching because you're a good teacher. If you're not a good teacher and you're horrible at math, well, you know, then we're in really bad shape. So it's kind of the same thing with writing. Like writing is a skill in and of itself, and then there's whatever you're writing
Mm,
about. So
mm,
I think that people just mash it all together. And
mm,
in order to be like truly good at this, you need two things. You need, first of all, to get good at writing. It's a skill set. Not everybody takes the time to get good at it. I mean, the tools of a writer are words and sentences and paragraphs and chapters, metaphors and similes. Like there are tools and skill sets that belong to the writer. And then you have to write about something. So, what is your area of expertise? What are the things that you have taken the time to learn about? Um, that would put you in a nonfiction realm. And then we also have the fiction realm, right? Like if you're a teller of stories. Um, for me personally, I always wanted to be a fiction writer. But I never had that moment where something sparked a story in me. So I had this
mm.
desire to write stories, but but I wasn't like there were no characters, there was no setting, there was just the desire because I love fiction to do that thing. So for me, nonfiction, where I am using my skill as a writer, but talking about things that I actually know about, is what was most comfortable. I have dog number 2 who is now saying, I must come in. So we're going for another little walk.
So you pay
So
attention. I love you're paying attention to the modern outer world, right? This is a modern mystic, paying attention to what is
this is
actually happening around us.
this is a modern dog mama. Um, Paying attention to all the beasts who got stuck outside. I have a friend visiting from out of town, and she doesn't know their routine, so she went for a walk and she let them out because they wanted to go out then, but that doesn't mean they want to stay out.
So
um,
funny.
so that's first with writing is just this idea of like, if you love books, if you're like, oh my god, I love reading, and that's why you want to be a writer, um, think about whether you actually love writing. Because if you don't love writing, it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of work. So,
Yeah.
if what you're instead saying is, I have a lot of ideas and I want to get them out in the world, then think about what the best form of getting them out is. Is it writing? Is it a podcast? Is it, social media? Like there are lots of ways to get your ideas out into the world. If you don't actually love playing with words and sentences and paragraphs, then think about what this attraction to writing is. It's okay to be a voracious reader. There's nothing wrong with that. Like you don't have to become a writer because you're a reader. So
So
um
wise. So many wise things you just said. Thank you. Really, really good. And what about people who want to use writing or are interested in exploring the written word as spiritual practice? What are ways that you do that, if you do
yeah.
it, or ways that you could recommend?
So one of my favorite practices, well, I have a lot of favorite practices that kind of incorporate writing. But when it comes to that idea of like connection, how do we connect? Um, I love to set an intention at the top of a page, like
Okay.
I want to connect with the energy of my grandma. Um, and then I do what's called free writing. I set a timer, usually 10 minutes, and I just write whatever comes to mind. Usually the first 3 minutes are gobbledygook. Usually the first 3 minutes are me being like, this is bullshit. This doesn't work. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm wasting my time. And then, if you just stick with it, something begins to shift. Sometimes,
Yeah.
depending on how structured I'm feeling, like especially if I'm trying to connect with a person or a plant energy or an animal energy, I might set up the scenario where, like, if they were writing a letter to me, what would it say? And then I can start like Dear Maya, and that sometimes gets me going. But
Oh, that's interesting. I love that.
yeah, like using writing as a way of, I was talking earlier about how all this energy is coming in um, from the world around you, but we don't have a way of translating it. And so in that moment saying, okay, I am channeling what I'm feeling energetically through my hand, through my pen onto the page, and allowing yourself to write, for whatever energy you're trying to connect with. So that's one exercise I love. Another is I do a lot of write and burn. So when I just need to get something out of me, I write it down, burn it. If I really need to make it gone, I bury the ashes. Um,
Yes.
so it's, if you think of it, it's almost like a reverse process, right? Like if the words make something um, whole and real and pull it into reality, then you take the words and you burn them and you like disintegrate them and make them unreality. Um,
That's brilliant. That's really
yeah.
brilliant.
So, and then a final exercise along similar lines is if there's something that I want to get rid of, or if I'm having issues with someone and there's like an energetic impediment, um, I might write out their name and cross out all the vowels, because without vowels, like the words fall apart. So if you
Mm-hmm.
write your name and cross out all the vowels and try to say it, um, there's not much left. And if we go back to that idea of the chakras, they each have a sound and they're pretty much vowel sounds. So like
Yeah.
you're disconnecting the language from your energy system when you take the vowels out. Um, you're pulling the energy from it. So that's another thing I'll play with, like especially if I need something that I can vocalize, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
cross the vowels out and then you experiment with saying the dang thing, and it's a hot mess. But if you want to express with your voice and really get something out, it gives you an opportunity to do that.
That's so genius. And I love the idea of crossing out the vowels with, someone, a situation, or a person that is extra charged, because it's like you're diffusing it. You're literally like breaking some synapses, but you're keeping the consonants. So, you're still like honoring somehow the presence of them in your life, which of course
Yeah.
they're there to teach you, but yet there's like an overcharge and probably attachment or aversion, as the many traditions talk about those two things being the root of our suffering. But I taking out the vows, that's really, really great, really brilliant.
Right?
Thank you. Those are really practical, brilliant things to
Yay.
offer people in a really concrete way. So very, very good. And I guess the last thing I just wanted to touch on, and it's sort of near the end of your book, but people who have not read her book, which will be most of you, it's such a beautiful sojourn, odyssey, and journey of someone who's very real, very human, very young, and then moving towards this process, I feel like, of coming into a sense of who you, Maya, and as the protagonist in the story, who you are as a adult, full-fledged human in the actual practical world, and your process of coming to terms with and clarifying who that is for you. And then also weaving, as you talked about with the spider web, weaving through that embodiment and integrating the magical, the spiritual, the mystical, so to speak. And at the end of it, towards the end of it, and you have this amazing, interesting life story, and it eventually takes you to Ireland, which I'm really partial to, having Irish descent and being an Irish priestess myself, and you studied with your teacher, and you became, this amazing herbalist. And so it's this amazing journey of that, and the logistics of what happens to you, and then of course what's happening to you on the inside, which you share so eloquently and really, really tenderly and really authentically. And towards the end, you talk about coming into more peace with death through being with birds. And so I thought towards the end of this conversation, even just to give people a little taste of the book and the endings of things and the ending of this conversation, that experience for you, because I think death is such a hard thing, particularly as Westerners. You and I are American. Death is so obscured and hidden and suppressed, I think, in our culture. And it's so beautiful how being with the dead birds, you spoke of this coming to terms with and peace and understanding of death. So maybe you could talk about that, please, a little bit and give people a taste of the book.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I do say in that interlude is I was not a perfect priestess by any stretch. Like, you know, um, there was a lot of squirming and discomfort, but I started finding dead birds, and um, at first I
This is
thought
in
that's
Ireland, people.
this is in Ireland. And at first it was under like a power line that went across the pastures behind my teacher's house. And I thought that there was like something wrong with the power line and that, the birds were getting electrocuted. So I
Mm,
went to my teacher and I said, I found a couple dead birds under the power line, and um, like we should do something. And I'm thinking we should do something, like we should call the power company. There's something wrong with the power line.
hmm
And she said, well, I guess it's time for you to learn to deal with death. What are you going to
mm,
do? you know um so calling the power company was not part of the plan, apparently. And I built a cairn, which is like an older structure used in Celtic cultures, and very similar to structures used in cultures around the world. Um, Basically, you want to bury the body under a pile of stones so the wild animals can't get it, right? So I started building a cairn and putting the dead birds in, and the dead birds just kept coming. It was like they knew there was the dead bird hotel over in our garden. And over my time there, this cairn got quite large. Um, and I think at different moments it was different things. There was not one emotional or mental storyline for me, um, but this became like the temple I was tending, and
yeah.
you know, visiting over and over and over again. Um, and seeing seeing it from like the physical, like how am I going to physically move the body of the dead bird to the cairn, like all the way through the metaphysical. Um, is there still energy here? Does it need to be released, or has it released itself? Am I trapping the energy by putting it in the cairn? Like, just, all these
Mm,
all these questions that I don't think we actually have answers to, but we have to allow ourselves to ask them. We have to allow ourselves to step into the dance of unraveling that comes, when our physical body is no longer the home for our spiritual body. Like, what is that? And how are we going to step into that? Um, I feel like all these things are practice. They're
yeah.
they're all practice for the thing we were promised the moment we were born, which is it doesn't last forever. This dance doesn't last forever. So, w- you know, how are we going to approach that transition? And I don't think that
Yeah.
I don't think we can know, but I do think that we can explore with an open heart, and use these moments when they arise to tune into ourselves and see what we can notice.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for speaking to that. It was just such a touching part of the book to me, and there are just so many wisdom gems from that, and you just extrapolated on them so beautifully. But I just want to honor too how so much about what I love about your work, your different books, your products, as an herbalist, as a oracle card maker, etc., is you're really drafting off nature to dive deeper into your own personal life lessons and journey, and you were moving towards something that was happening to you in your life. You weren't like, yeah, you sought out going to Ireland, and there are many glamorous parts of that, but that really touched me reading that, because it was something that you were more adverse to looking at, toward to doing. And then in this opportunity, you could have been like, okay, well, I won't call the power company, but you went and did something with that even more. You went towards the hardness, you went towards the nature or the lesson it was showing you. And I think that's just such a beautiful example of what, we're all um, charged in life to do at times, to look at the harder things, whether it's illness, whether it's death, whether, we're all faced with these things if we're lucky enough to still be here. And then how to work with them. Like you said, they're all like a practice run for the ultimate practice. So again, just so many levels to that story. So thank you for sharing. It's really, really gorgeous.
Yeah, you're welcome. One
So
of the things that I've just noticed is we like to use nature as a metaphor, but we like to use the growth cycle, and we often skip the decay and the death. So I think it's really important to honor the entirety of the cycle. And I honestly
yes,
don't think that you can talk about the growth part of the cycle without honoring the decay and the death part of the cycle. Otherwise, you're actually not really talking about nature. You're talking about some,
totally.
you know, mystical utopian version of nature.
Yeah, yeah. No, and it's like full circle back to where we started. And I forget which author says that. You might know that quote. And yet, you're back to where you started, and yet you see the place for the very first time. There's a famous
Yes, who
author who
said
said that.
that?
Is it? It's not Descartes. I don't know. It's someone, but it's such a, here we are, back to the beginning of the conversation about how when the spirituality happens and we're ignited on our journeys, how when the challenges happen, and we're already halfway through, like you said, right? And if we don't go fully through, A, we have to backtrack, and B, we're not facing the ultimate end of it, which is, of course, the beginning. And even back to your spider metaphor, which you talk a lot about in the book, which I didn't know, that one type of spider that like ingests part of the silk, like it actually retracts it back into
It
itself. So
eats
again,
it.
it's
It
right.
Yeah,
Say,
it
yeah,
eats the
talk about
web.
that. It's so interesting.
So
It,
so s- the spider webs are made of protein, and in the natural world, protein is actually kind of hard to come by, right?
mm,
So
right.
so the spider will ingest its own web and like recycle it, use the protein again.
I love that, because that's
Yeah.
another metaphor that kind of makes you go like, yeah, yeah, like interesting. But then it's like, I was like, so
Interesting and
cool. I mean,
ew and
I have Pluto on my sun, so death and metaphysical and these ingesting themes. I'm a fan of. They're easier for me than some people, but isn't that like so cool? The spider ingests, right, part of the thread to then recycle it and then spit it back out and spin something beautiful and helpful to it in the way of getting its food. So it's just so many profound teachings in that. Would you mind, Maya, just for like 1-2 minutes, just closing out our conversation with a benediction or a blessing or anything that you feel moved to share, expanding your
Hmm.
bubble girl
how
energy, whatever.
how about if I read a little bit? Shall
Yes,
I shall
story
I
time as
read a little
practice.
bit? Let's just,
It's
because
a
I was
great
not ready for
idea.
this, I'm just going to open
And
and
it's her
see.
hardback book with a jacket. Friends listening audio won't be able to see it, but I want to honor the feeling of when you're an author and you have a hardback book with a paper jacket, the celebration of that.
So, yes, thank you for honoring that, because there's something about a jacketed book. It makes you feel like a real author. So, okay, so this is interesting. I opened to a page where I'm working with a massage therapist, and I am realizing that that old stories and old sensations and emotions are actually stored in my muscle memory, in my fascia. Um, Laying on the table, I recalled the sensation of being upside down, of gripping the bar, of flipping my legs, ready to bring them over. And then I felt my left hand give, saw the ground rushing up, felt the back of my head striking the earth. My ear and neck ached. Feet rushed toward me, my mom's. I'd ended up with a concussion, and apparently my shoulder still felt guilty. On the surface, this sounded far-fetched, but the faint scent of vanilla wafted from the massage therapist's hands, the candlelight danced on my eyelids, my body had softened, and my mind was drifting. Instead of spiraling into thoughts of disbelief, I cataloged the things I'd learned to feel in my body over the last year. Joy, an expansion in my chest, like a rose opening to the sunset sky. Lies, both mine and other people's. A tightening in my throat, thick and gluey. A pending fight. An itch in my nose, usually just one nostril. Creativity stymied. A pinch in my ovary. Being untrue to myself. A crack in my left ankle. If I ignored it, my ankle would refuse to support me. It won't be true if I won't. I had learned that emotions lived in every part of me. Apparently, memory did too. My left shoulder remembers dropping me and feels guilty about it. Suddenly, I found I could make that leap.
Mm, so beautiful. And the prosaic medicine that you just gifted us, that really beautiful reminder to of what we spoke of earlier, to pay attention, dear ones. That's the practice today of what's happening in your body and the next 24 hours. Really, really take note more than perhaps you ever have. This is the invitation to notice what your body tells you and the stories and the novels that live in your own body and the GPS that can lead you to more profundity and magic in the mundane. So thank you so much, Maia. You were just such a breath of fresh air and rich air and just complete wisdom. And I just honor you and your work and your journey, and I'm so grateful that you were here to share about your new book. And everybody listening, where can folks find out about you and all of the things in your work?
Yeah, so my website is just my name, Maia, Maia, Toll, TOLL.com. Easy enough.
Her claimed name, yo. So much power in that name. I love it. Well, Maia is so generously offering a 7-day free trial of her Substack subscription, unkempt, to my monthly members. So if you aren't a monthly member of my amazing Modern Mystic membership, there's over 150 alignment-based yoga classes of all different levels. Really, really powerful practice. In addition to meditation practices, breathwork practices, all sorts of mystic hacks where you can learn about working with your own energy in ways we even alluded to today, and astrology tutorials, tarot tutorials, and so much goodness. So for $33 a month, go to modernmystic.love and you can become a member and get Maia's most generous offering, and so many discounts and goodies for you over there. And yeah, you can go to modernmystic.love for my Venus Elite Vibrant coaching. I have one session opening up for this month, and learn to work with your intuition and so many things. This past month, I helped someone launch a podcast. So very practical things I support people with, a lot of spiritual entrepreneurs and high-powered women. And check out Maia's book. Again, it's just released. People can find it now.
Depends when we go live with this podcast. It's June 27th is the release date.
Yes.
It's available for pre-order before then. And if someone pre-orders, we actually have this awesome tote bag with a quote from the book. So go to my website and you can get details. It's only for pre-orders, and can figure out how to claim your tote. If you have any trouble with that, just email me.
Okay, amazing. That's 2023 because people will be listening to this for years to come. So go find her book, go find her oracle cards. I love your oracle cards. And thank you
Thank you.
so much for being here with us today, Maia.
Thank you, Kilkenny. It's always, always so enlightening and delightful to be with you.
Oh, well, namaste.